The autumn sun hung low over London, its amber rays bathing the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace in a golden glow that seemed to whisper of history's weight. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of the city, a symphony of honking taxis, chattering voices, and the soft cooing of pigeons scattered across the cobblestones. The palace stood resolute, its iron gates a barrier between the ordinary world and the timeless grandeur within. Yet, on this late October evening of 2025, the extraordinary would not emerge from royal decrees or ceremonial splendor. It would rise from a single, trembling gesture, a moment so profound it would silence a courtyard, bring strangers to tears, and etch itself into the annals of human connection. Arthur Reynolds, an 85-year-old veteran of the Royal Navy, stood at the edge of the palace courtyard, his frail frame steadied by a polished oak cane carved with the names of ships he had served: HMS Courageous, HMS Defiant, HMS Resolute. His coat, threadbare and faded from decades of wear, was a living testament to his life's sacrifices. Pinned to its breast were medals that glinted faintly in the dusk: the Victoria Cross for bravery under fire, the Distinguished Service Medal for leadership in the face of despair, and others, each a chapter in a story of courage and loss. His face, etched with deep lines like a map of his years, bore the marks of a man who had seen the world at its darkest. The roar of cannons, the screams of sinking ships, the endless grey of the sea that claimed so many. Yet his eyes, a piercing blue, burned with an unyielding fire, a spark that time and age could not extinguish. Beside him stood his grandson, Tommy, a boy of 12 whose chestnut hair fell in unruly waves over his forehead. Tommy's hand rested in Arthur's, not out of necessity, but out of devotion, a bond forged through countless evenings by the fireside, where Arthur's tales of the sea had painted vivid pictures in the boy's imagination. Tommy wore a navy blue jacket, a miniature version of his grandfather's, with a single poppy pinned to the lapel, a symbol of remembrance that Arthur had fastened there that morning. The boy's eyes, wide and curious, darted across the courtyard, taking in the grandeur of the palace, the scarlet-clad guards, and the kaleidoscope of tourists who filled the space with their laughter and chatter. The courtyard was a microcosm of the world. A Chinese family posed for selfies, their faces alight with excitement. A Brazilian couple, arms entwined, marveled at the palace's architecture, their guidebook open to a dog-eared page. A Nigerian student, earbuds dangling, scribbled notes for a history project, her pen racing to capture the moment. A retired couple from Yorkshire, their accents thick and warm, shared a thermos of tea, their eyes tracing the palace's silhouette with quiet pride. A street busker, his guitar case open for coins, strummed a haunting rendition of Danny Boy, the notes weaving through the crowd like a thread of melancholy. And at the heart of it all, framed by the palace's majestic facade, stood a young royal guard, his scarlet tunic and bearskin hat a beacon of tradition. His name was James Carter, though the crowd knew him only as a symbol, a stoic figure bound by duty. At 23, James was the youngest in his regiment, a man whose broad shoulders and steady gaze belied the weight he carried. He had joined the Queen's Guard to honor his father, a paratrooper killed in a distant conflict when James was just a boy. The dog tags his father had worn still hung above James's bunk, their etched letters a daily reminder of the cost of service. Trained to stand motionless for hours, to ignore the jeers of tourists and the ache in his legs, James was a living statue, his face an unreadable mask. Yet beneath the discipline, his heart beat with questions. Was he worthy of his father's legacy? Did his service matter in a world that seemed to forget its heroes? Arthur's journey to this moment had begun long before the sun rose. In his modest flat in East London, where the walls were lined with sepia photographs and naval mementos, he had risen at dawn, his joints protesting with every movement. He had stood before a cracked mirror, adjusting his coat with care, his fingers lingering on each medal as if greeting old friends. The Victoria, Cross, awarded for saving his crew during a U-boat attack in 1943, felt heavier than the others. Its weight, a reminder of the man who hadn't come home. His late wife, Margaret, had always polished the medals before Remembrance Day, her hands gentle but firm. "You carry them for the others, Art," she would say, her voice soft as the sea at dawn. Margaret had been gone 5 years now, her absence a wound that never healed, but her words still guided him. "Tommy, help me with this, lad," Arthur had called that morning, his voice gruff but warm. Tommy, bleary-eyed but eager, had scampered to his side, pinning the poppy to Arthur's coat with the solemnity of a squire arming a knight. "Are we going to see the king?" "Granddad," the boy had asked, his imagination alight with tales of royalty. Arthur had chuckled, a sound like gravel shifting. "Not the king, lad, something better. We're going to honor the past." The bus ride to Westminster had been slow, the city unfolding in a blur of red buses and grey stone. But Arthur's heart had quickened with each mile. This was not just a visit to the palace. It was a pilgrimage, a chance to stand where history lived and breathe life into memories that refused to fade. Now, as Arthur stood in the courtyard, his gaze settled on the young guard, and a flood of memories surged within him. He was 19 again. Aboard HMS Courageous, the North Atlantic stretching endlessly before him, like a canvas of storm and steel. The wind had howled, carrying the salt of the sea and the dread of battle. He remembered the faces of his crewmates, boys like Tommy, their eyes bright with dreams of home. There was Eddie, the gunner with a laugh like a foghorn. Sarah, the radio operator who sang hymns to calm the crew. And young Charlie, barely 16, who had lied about his age to enlist. Arthur saw them all, their faces vivid as the day he lost them. It was February 1943. And the Courageous was escorting a convoy through U-boat-infested waters. The night was black, the sea a churning beast. Arthur, then a petty officer, stood at his post, his hands raw from the cold. The first torpedo struck at midnight, a thunderclap that tore through the ship's hull. The second followed, and the Courageous began to list, its steel, groaning like a dying giant. "Abandon ship," the captain shouted, but the lifeboats were too few, the water too cold. Arthur had hauled Charlie toward a raft, the boy's face pale with fear. "Stay with me, lad," Arthur had growled, his voice a lifeline. But the sea was merciless. A wave swept Charlie away, his scream swallowed by the dark. Arthur had clung to a piece of wreckage, his body numb, his heart heavy with the names of the lost Eddie, Sarah, Charlie, and dozens more. He had saluted the sea that night, alone in the dawn's grey light, a promise to carry their memory. The rescue ship found him hours later, half frozen but alive, the only survivor of his watch. The Victoria Cross came later, pinned to his chest by a king who spoke of valor. But Arthur had worn it for the others, for the faces he could never forget. Now, standing before Buckingham Palace, he felt that same urge, that same need to honor what had been given and what had been taken. The young guard, with his rigid posture and unyielding gaze, was a mirror of Arthur's own youth, a reminder of the boys who had stood beside him, who had dreamed of a future they would never see. "Tommy," Arthur said, his voice low but steady, "do you know what a salute means?" The boy looked up, his brow furrowed, his small hand still clasped in his grandfather's. "It's when soldiers say hello, isn't it?" Arthur's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes crinkling at the edges. "It's more than that, lad. It's a promise, a way of saying, I see you, I respect you, I carry your weight. It's for the ones who came before, and the ones who'll come after." Tommy nodded, his young mind grappling with the words, but sensing their weight. He squeezed Arthur's hand, his small fingers warm against the old man's calloused palm. Arthur took a step forward, his cane tapping the cobblestones, his joints aching but his resolve unshaken. The crowd parted slightly, as if drawn by an invisible force, their eyes catching the glint of his medals, the tremor in his stance. A woman in a yellow scarf, visiting from Dublin with her husband, paused mid-sentence, her gaze locking onto Arthur. "Look at him," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's a hero, isn't he?" Her husband, a burly man with a camera slung around his neck, nodded, his throat tight. A Japanese student, sketching the palace in a leather-bound notebook, let her pencil hover, her breath catching as she watched the old man move. A German backpacker, his phone poised for a photo, lowered it, sensing something momentous unfolding. With a slowness that belied his strength, Arthur raised his right hand. His fingers, gnarled by arthritis and weathered by time, trembled as they formed the salute palm out, elbow bent, eyes locked on the young guard. The medals on his chest caught the dying light, flashing like beacons across the courtyard. For a moment, the world held its breath. The busker's guitar fell silent, the final note of Danny Boy hanging unfinished in the air. The Chinese family lowered their selfie sticks, their chatter fading. The Brazilian couple closed their guidebook, their hands finding each other. The Nigerian student slipped her earbuds out, her pen still. Even the pigeons, scattered across the cobblestones, seemed to pause, their wings stilled, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. James Carter, the guard, felt the weight of Arthur's salute like a tide pulling at his soul. His training screamed at him to remain still, to embody the stoic perfection of his role. To move was to break protocol, to risk reprimand, to shatter the illusion of the palace's unyielding order. The Queen's Guard were not men in the eyes of the crowd. They were symbols, statues, extensions of the crown itself. To acknowledge a salute, even one as profound as this, was to step into the human, to admit vulnerability. Yet, as James stared into Arthur's eyes, eyes that carried the storms of a lifetime, the weight of 1,000 battles, he saw not just an old man, but a brother in arms, a man who had stood where James now stood, who had faced death and carried its scars. James's mind raced. Though his body remained rigid, he thought of his father, whose laughter had once filled their small terraced house in Leeds. He remembered the day the chaplain came, the folded flag, the silence that followed. His father had been a paratrooper, a man who leaped into the unknown for king and country. And James had vowed to honor him, to live a life of purpose. The dog tags above his bunk were a talisman, a reminder of that vow. But standing here, in the shadow of Buckingham Palace, James felt a new question rise. Was honor only in duty, or was it in connection, in seeing the humanity in another? The crowd watched, transfixed, as the seconds stretched into eternity. The woman in the yellow scarf clutched her husband's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "He's going to do it, isn't he?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The Japanese student, her sketch abandoned, pressed her hands together, her eyes wide with anticipation. The German backpacker, his phone forgotten, felt a lump rise in his throat, a memory of his own grandfather, a Luftwaffe pilot who had spoken of war's cost, a journalist from The Guardian, stationed nearby for a routine story on tourism, scribbled furiously in her notebook, sensing a moment that would outlive the day's headlines. Tommy, standing at his grandfather's side, held his breath, his small chest swelling with pride, his eyes darting between his grandfather and the guard. Arthur's arm ached, the tremor in his fingers growing. But he held the salute steady, his gaze unwavering. He saw not just James, but every sailor who had stood beside him, every soul who had fought and fallen. He saw Eddie, laughing over a tin of biscuits. Sarah, her voice steady as she relayed orders. Charlie, his eyes wide with fear and hope. He saw Margaret, her smile a beacon through the years, her hand in his as they danced at their wedding, as they mourned their lost friends, as they raised their daughter, Tommy's mother. The salute was for them all. A bridge across time, a vow to never forget. Then, with a motion as sharp as a blade, James raised his hand. His gloved fingers mirrored Arthur's, his salute crisp and deliberate. the crack of his boots against the stone echoing like a gunshot across the courtyard. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a wave of murmurs, soft sobs, and stifled cheers. The woman in the yellow scarf buried her face in her husband's shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. The Japanese student clapped a hand over her mouth, her sketchbook slipping to the ground. The German backpacker let a tear fall, splashing onto the cobblestones, a silent tribute to his own family's history. The journalist's pen froze, her eyes glistening as she realized she was witnessing history, not just reporting it. For Arthur, the guard salute was a lifeline, a tether to the past, and a beacon for the future. He saw the faces of his crewmates, their smiles breaking through the fog of memory. He saw Margaret, her laughter echoing in his heart. He saw Tommy, the boy who would carry his stories forward, who would grow into a man shaped by this moment. His lips trembled, and a tear traced the lines of his face, catching the light as it fell. Tommy, sensing the weight of the moment, squeezed his grandfather's hand, his own eyes glistening. "You did it, Granddad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You made them see." The crowd, now a congregation bound by shared emotion, began to move. The Chinese family, their selfies forgotten, stepped closer, their hands pressed to their hearts. The Brazilian couple embraced, their guidebook slipping to the ground, their whispers lost in the tide of feeling. The Nigerian student, her notes abandoned, whispered a prayer in Yoruba, her voice soft but fervent. The retired couple from Yorkshire, their thermos forgotten, clasped hands, their eyes bright with tears. The busker, his guitar still silent, nodded to Arthur, a gesture of respect that needed no words. The journalist, her notebook filled with hurried scrawls, began to type on her phone, drafting a story that would capture the world's attention. James, his salute complete, lowered his hand and resumed his post, his face once again a mask of duty, but beneath the bearskin hat, his eyes burned with a new understanding. He had broken protocol, yes, but he had honored something greater. He had seen Arthur not as a stranger, but as a mirror of his own purpose, a reminder of why he stood there, hour after hour, in the shadow of the palace. He thought of his father, whose dog tags would greet him that night, and felt a quiet peace. He had made his father proud, not by standing still, but by reaching out as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The courtyard began to stir. The tourists resumed their chatter, the children their laughter, the pigeons their fluttering. Yet something lingered, a quiet reverence, a shared memory that would not fade. Arthur, his strength spent, leaned heavily on Tommy's shoulder, his chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. "Let's go home, lad," he said, his voice soft but sure. Tommy nodded, guiding his grandfather through the crowd, which parted like a sea, their eyes following the old man with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The walk to the bus stop was slow, Arthur's cane tapping a steady rhythm, Tommy's hand a constant anchor. The city moved around them, taxis honking, lights flickering on, London alive in its endless dance. But for Arthur, the world was quieter, softer, as if the salute had carved a space of peace within him. He thought of Margaret, imagining her smile, her voice saying, "You did good, Art." He thought of Charlie, whose face was clearer now, unburdened by the sea's shadow. He thought of Tommy, who would tell this story one day, perhaps to his own children, keeping the flame alive. Back at the palace, James stood his post until the shift change, the courtyard emptying as night fell. When he finally stepped into the barracks, his mates were waiting, their questions tumbling over each other. "Why'd you do it, Carter?" one asked, half teasing, half awed. James, unbuttoning his tunic, paused, his fingers brushing the fabric. "Because he deserved it," he said simply, his voice steady. That night, he sat on his bunk, his father's dog tags in his hands, and felt a connection that stretched beyond the years, beyond the palace, beyond the uniform. The crowd, scattered to their homes across the globe, carried the moment with them. The woman in the yellow scarf, back in Dublin, told her neighbors, her voice breaking as she described the old man's trembling hand. The Japanese student, on her flight to Tokyo, finished her sketch, adding the guard salute with careful strokes. The German backpacker, in a Berlin hostel, uploaded his video, watching as likes and shares climbed into the millions. The journalist's story, published the next morning, went viral. Its headline, "The Salute That Stopped Time Capturing Hearts from London to Lahore." The Nigerian student, in her dorm, wrote a poem, its lines weaving the old man's medals with the god's courage. The Yorkshire couple, in their quiet village, raised a toast to the veteran, their voices thick with pride. In the weeks that followed, the story grew, a spark that ignited conversations, editorials, and quiet moments of reflection. Historians debated its significance, citing the rare breach of protocol as a symbol of humanity's triumph over rigidity. Poets penned verses, their words painting the salute as a bridge across generations. Families shared the video at dinner tables, their children asking, "Why did he salute? Why did the guard move?" And the answers, varied but true, all circled back to the same truths: respect for those who came before, duty to those who stand beside, honor for those who will carry the flame forward. Arthur returned to his flat, where he hung his coat on its familiar hook and placed his cane by the door. Tommy, now a keeper of the memory, drew pictures of the moment, his crayons capturing the guard's scarlet tunic, his grandfather's trembling hand, the crowd's tear-streaked faces. The medals, polished once more, sat on a shelf beside a photo of Margaret, her smile eternal. Arthur, sitting by the window, watched the rain fall over London. His heart full, he had not sought fame or glory, only to honor the past. Yet the world had seen, and the world had remembered. In the shadow of Buckingham Palace, where history's echoes linger, one salute had done what wars and speeches could not. It had united strangers, rekindled memories, and reminded a distracted world of what endures. Some moments are fleeting, lost to the churn of time. But this one, born of a trembling hand and a steadfast heart, would live forever, a testament to the power of a single gesture to heal, to inspire, and to connect across the ages. The screen fades to black, with white text glowing softly. The salute that made Buckingham Palace cry. A distant bugle plays, its mournful notes fading into silence as the credits roll.